And go live. Hi everyone, and welcome to this morning's episode of A History of Everyone Else. My name is Meera. I'm joined with Rhianna, the other co-founder, and for those who haven't joined us before, we have set up this platform to really counteract the stories and narratives that we grew up learning about, in particular British colonialism, but European colonialism more generally. We have grown up learning about the great men of history and looking at our public spaces and our streets lined with statues of white colonizing men, and we knew that history is much more interesting, much more complex, and there are groups and individuals that are worth learning about. Today we are delighted to be joined by Nora and Tondi from the ISUSU Pan platform. Guys, would you like to introduce yourselves to everyone?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Tondi or Tonderai. As Meera mentioned, I'm part of the ISUSU Pan collective. But what I do is I'm an architect by profession. I have a strong interest in my research and practice in decolonization in both the African and the European context, because I grew up in Zimbabwe but live in German. I'm German Zimbabwean myself. And I think theoretical questions about space and architectural history and theory are most interesting to me. Right now, I work for an architecture publishing company. Before that, I was in the Architecture Museum in Munich. And yeah, I'm really interested to have this opportunity to talk about some of the work I do just for myself.
I'm Nora Chirikure. I am Zimbabwean German as well. I grew up in Zimbabwe and basically now I'm living in Berlin. Amongst, I guess one of the things I do is I'm part of the ISUSU Pan collective. And I'm also studying my master's in economics. And there is, I guess the reason why I study this as well is because I'm really interested in like how people organize themselves, and also because a lot of things are about the money. So I'm curious like how we can organize ourselves in a way that's fair. And within ISUSU Pan, we organize events. So this is also something I'm really excited about. I love like meeting with new people, connecting with new people. And it's a Pan-African collective, which for us means also talking about like a lot of stories around Black people across countries. And I have a special interest in monuments. I've always liked like visiting different cities, finding out about the histories of different places. And for me, it's very important how we symbolize in public places, because this really shapes attitudes of people as well. So that's about me. And I'm also part of an initiative called the Sangano Business Hub, where we're also working with African Afro-diasporan entrepreneurs in Germany. Yeah.
And I think what's also interesting about us taking part in this together is that we grew up in Zimbabwe together and friends for all this time, for many, many years. And now we find ourselves in Berlin together. And that's like a really important theme that will go throughout all the things we'll discuss today, I think.
Yeah. And yeah, what age were you when you met, out of interest?
How old
6.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we met at 6, and I remember because I think it was at our church. So what's interesting as well is we grew up going literally to the same. We went to church together, school together, German school together. So we'll see each other almost every day of the week. Played soccer together, we're bridge partners. So yeah.
Yeah, maybe before we get into it, obviously, maybe you can share a little bit more of the German Zimbabwean connection and how you guys ended up having these mixed identities and finding yourselves in Germany. And a bit more about your family stories and how this links to the wider questions of history and colonialism as well that we're talking about.
Yeah, do you want to go first, Nora?
You can go.
That's a really interesting question because I think our at least my family history is very steeped in the colonial history as well. So the reason why I think this German Zimbabwean connection happened for me goes probably back to my grandma in Zimbabwe. When she was growing up under the Rhodesian government, they came to Zimbabwe with pushing the idea that Black Africans were didn't have the intellectual capacity to take part in society the way white people could, and this is why this was one of the reasons they based their oppression on, and. So my grandma was then in a year where for the first time they allowed some African students to write Cambridge GCSE exams. And in her year, she got like the highest result in the country, which kind of forced this is a really exciting part of my family history. And so this kind of forced the Rhodesian government at the time to admit that Africans were actually intellectually capable. And this resulted in her then getting a scholarship to study in England, because the way the world is set up was that an education, and especially a foreign education, is the one way to get ahead in life. And this kind of started the connection between my family and Europe, which eventually also brought my mother to study in Europe, where she met my father. But then they decided to raise their children in Zimbabwe, which is, yeah.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's amazing about your grandma's story, and very much resonates with our family histories of foreign education being such a huge goal and driving migration patterns.
It's so interesting in that generation. Like I think if one day did an episode about everybody's grandparents, there would be really exciting things to come out of that.
Go in a lot of places. Yeah, Nora, do you want to share?
Well, I think for me, it's not like an explicit connection like that, but for sure also this going abroad to study, that's also like my family story. So basically my dad studied abroad, and that is where he then met my mother. But I also think, I guess the question is more like how your family and colonial ties, if I got that. Right? And I think a part of it is maybe also the opportunities. For me, I think also growing up with like two different cultures was one aspect where I would compare maybe the opportunities that my German side has had and then compare to the Zimbabwean side, where on both sides you'd see maybe people who work as hard as each other, but the others seem to get further ahead. And I think this comparison, and for me, it's mostly when I compare my grandfathers. So I didn't know my grandmother on my dad's side, but I guess the story of my grandfathers who had the same like worked for so many years, both of them. And my Zimbabwean grandfather, who was working in Rhodesia, you'd kind of work for almost nothing. And this also then shaped maybe the fact that like some of my dad's siblings didn't have opportunities to go abroad, and only my dad, who got lucky, had the opportunity to go abroad. And I think also on that, I mean, a lot of my family, like I guess the dynamics is also then Germany sending teachers to Zimbabwe, for example, and still like spreading the influence like that was also part of a program my mother was in. So for sure, like there have been many different influences of how it affects my personal story.
Yeah, nice. Thank you for sharing, and all the different individuals and people who are affected by these histories. Like, like Tondi said, we could have a whole episode just talking about family, but we're here to talk, about the histories of the cities that have largely shaped you both as well. And Nora and I actually met in Berlin about 2 years ago and worked for the same event space. And I was really curious when we were talking that last summer, you guys organized, with your collective, organized a festival, and you also explored the Berlin Conference of 1884. And rethinking what this could look like. And I think I was just curious because despite living in Berlin for a long time and being interested in history, I never really came across people talking about the Berlin Conference. I knew it was linked to this so-called scramble for Africa, which and I remember seeing that phrase for the first time aged 18 and having no idea what that meant. So maybe before we get into your festival and what you guys did, maybe you could give us a bit more of the history of what that conference was and how it's remembered in Berlin.
Yeah, sure. So it's really interesting that what you say about having heard about the Scramble for Africa for the first time when you were 18 years old, because yeah, I think that's so much part of the reason why we were interested in doing this work and this research. So the Berlin Conference is a conference that took place in Berlin. In Germany, they just call it the Congo Conference. Because it was a conference where the European colonial powers kind of formalized the scramble for Africa for the first time. So it took place between 1884 and 1885. All of the major colonial powers of the time were present. And the outcome was a general act that kind of outlined the relations between the European powers, or how they would go about the next steps of formally colonizing Africa. And yeah, it did confirm a lot of really, like, a lot of the acts that were signed kind of, well, I would give one example is the Belgian claim in Congo was formally accepted. So King Leopold at the time, if anybody knows a little bit about that, claimed the Congo as Belgian personal property, and this was one of the things that was accepted at the conference, and that really did shape a lot of the things that happened in Africa in the following years. So there's a bit of argument amongst historians about the actual significance of the conference, because in the following years, a lot happened. I mean, that was the formal Scramble for Africa happened after the conference, and a lot of things that were decided upon during the conference did change and shift. But I would say, and I think a lot of historians would agree, that it was still a very symbolic moment. So it was, first of all, the fact that this conference happened at all, with all these European powers without a single representative of an African state or group of people or anything present, was really, like, I think the first time that it became this, like, accepted that this was what the colonial thought was going to manifest in. And I think it was especially important also in the German context, because Bismarck was the chancellor at the time. He hosted the conference, and prior to the conference, Germany was always they took a bit of a backseat. They kind of I think they at the time didn't believe that a colonial venture was as much of a profitable business venture as other states had already realized it was. But at the conference, the fact that they had the conference at all, and then also the claims that they made within the conference, kind of kickstarted German involvement in the Scramble for Africa. And I think it's also particularly symbolic for African historians, scholars, theorists, and just people in general. I was just thinking about how a couple of weeks ago, I went to, via Zoom, I attended a book launch of a Zimbabwean archaeologist in England. And he was launching a book about a really famous historical site called Great Zimbabwe. And really amazing, one of the like a stone building, like really an important historical site for Zimbabwe, which has nothing to do with Germany in itself, the site. But he started the conference by kind of addressing the conference and situating the work he was doing now with respect to this conference. So I think that just shows how, for so many Africans who know that their histories are so much influenced by the Scramble for Africa, that this moment is such a symbolic and important thing. And that's also why when the ISUSU Pan-African Collective, the individual members of it, but also several others, when we moved to Berlin, one of the first things we did was to go to Wilhelmstrasse, which is the street in Berlin where the Reichstag used to be, the building where they had the conference at the time. And yeah, just to look for this place that is of so much importance to us. And yeah, we went there personally. I went with Marika, another member from our collective, and we were really disappointed by the lack of commemoration that we found. There is a plaque. We might get more into that later because we then did an event around this. But yeah, there's a very small plaque that just mentions that this is where the conference was, but it's on a historical street that is absolutely filled with monuments to all the historical events that took place there. Yeah, so this was why we then felt the need to talk more about this.
Amazing. Yeah, Nora, do you have something else to add to it before?
I mean, just also like on what Tondi said, like about finding the place, right? Actually, before that, when Tondi and I had also started talking about this, you sent me like the location, and then I was, you sent me the location, you sent me a map, and then you showed me the exact pinpoint. And it was during lockdown last summer, I think. Yeah. And then I was walking with my sister and friend, and we walked around and we were like, okay, so is there nothing? And I remember first like the relief of seeing, okay, yay, there's something, but then you kind of see it and you're like, ooh, like it's good to, that there is something there. And also like maybe Tondi can say something about that, but it was like according to our understanding, that was a private initiative that even got it to be remembered, the Association Africa Forum. And, you know, this is also important that there is something there, but you've heard about this conference like it defines everything. Like what Tondi said, like everyone draws to it and it's like it defined everything. And the place where it happens is like nothing. And I think this is so typical also when you visit like different places, you think you will see something more around like histories that shaped, histories that affect you a lot, like connected to African Afro-diasporans, but then you kind of get there and you're like, oh, no, not really, you know? And then I guess from that place, you're like, okay, but I guess there hasn't been a point where people said, okay, now your history has become important. So you're like, okay, maybe it is us that have to kind of see, okay, what can we do? How can we initiate this conversation? How can we initiate the change? Because you also realize that maybe certain things from the way that conference took place, if you hear about maybe some of the details, you're like, a lot of the stuff still feels very familiar to how business goes on today. So you're like, I'm not surprised, but surprised.
I'll show a picture of the plaque, and I think whilst I show it, it's also, we were talking before the call about how this conference was framed as like a liberal, almost anti-slavery conference. Maybe you guys can talk a bit about that.
This is surprising.
Picture as well. Yeah.
I think that is definitely something that really struck me when I was reading, the details of the conference, the framing of it, the actual kind of official remembrance of it, which is that, you know, we've now abolished slavery, so we're going to get together and decide what to do about Africa. And it felt really absurd. It felt really absurd. But yeah, I wanted to ask you guys about that, about how this conference links to kind of abolition movements.
Yeah, so let me just briefly mention that in the picture that was Nora and Tondi, who are also members of our collective when they went there. And yeah, it's really shocking seeing it framed this way now. I think one small advantage that Nora and I had is that we learned about this history in Zimbabwe. And while it was still the Cambridge syllabus, that still it doesn't fully allow for like a critical reading of the history. It's still very much in this idea of great British colonial power, and that's still kind of what comes through. We did have a little more, just slightly more critical teachers, I think. So for like, it was never really framed that way for us. It was always, I think, presented as this was the excuse they gave. This was what they used. But I was then surprised when I was doing my research here to find out that this was still the way in which people talk about it. So it was still this idea that the people involved in the conference were philanthropists. The idea was, that this anti-slavery stance, I find it, I was amazed when I recently listened to a podcast from the BBC about it, and they were talking about David Livingstone as this anti-slavery figure. And then I thought, but every other picture you see of David Livingstone, he has his two servants. I actually recently was looking for their names, who are carrying his bags, and they had these porters who carried their things, and then especially when you look at one of the big things to come out of the conference was the Belgian claim on the Congo and the incredible human rights abuses that went on there in the following years. It's incredible that it's still framed this way. Although I must say that I think that particular aspect is I think a bit more British than German. I think that's something that in British history that they also like to bring up and talk about in such cases. But I do think that even in the German context, so we have this word Erinnerungskultur, which is culture of remembrance, which is most commonly actually used in connection with the Holocaust, but that would include the remembrance of the colonial history. There's definitely a very big just lack of acknowledgement of the things that actually happened, and this idea of this attempt to paint the history as very differently from what it is. I actually live just next to a street in Berlin that's called the Lüderitzstraße, which was a German colonialist in Tanzania who also ordered something that started a genocide in that area, and there's a street just next door still named after him. So there's a lot of activists in the city actually working on this, which I'm very glad.
Amazing. Okay, so I guess then let's get into what you guys did in response to this. So we've seen the picture of that plaque and the one small thing is in the city already to remember this conference, but it hardly goes far enough. And what did you guys do? And we have some pictures as well to show. So let me know when to show the pictures. But yeah, if
you like, you can start with just the first picture that shows kind of our inspiration. I think when we were working with this, when we were looking at all the things that happen and all the research that does exist about this, we came across this picture by the artist Inka Shonibare, who does these interpretations of different, often European paintings or just historical moments with these figures, headless figures dressed in wax print, which really, I think, opens up new ways of imagining and interpreting the situation. So I don't know if you can see it very clearly on the picture, but there's a map of Africa on the table, and this is, I think it's titled Scramble for Africa. So this is clearly about the Berlin conference. And we had this idea that we wanted to research, talk about the Berlin conference and how this affects our life in Berlin now. We had a festival last year with the ISUSU Pan-African Collective. That's a yearly thing we want to do. And we had then, starting from our discussions about the Berlin conference, all these themes came out about monumentality, about narratives that are kind of excluded from the mainstream. And so we kind of used the Berlin conference as a starting point to tie all this together, to talk about all these things. So on the right, on these two pictures, you just see some of the different parts of the exhibition we had. And on the left, I think, was the main, the anchor point that brought the Berlin conference into into the exhibition, which was just a small idea of kind of trying to subvert this image that we have of these white colonialists around the table dividing the African continent. So we had a table with a European map, and because by default, because of our intentions, I would say a really big majority of the people who came to our festival and to the exhibition were Black people and people, Afro-diasporic people. And then we had on the table the opportunity to think about where are you local to? That was the main question we asked, and people could like pin places on this European map, and it was this idea of then, yeah, just turning it around, having people, and it was really interesting. Maybe Nora wants to mention the other day, she was talking about how the way people thought about the question, where are you local to?
Yeah, I think like the impression I also got was maybe for some people who might have just moved to the city or something like that, you're like, okay, I don't have anything I can really claim on this, but I also just want to participate. So I'm going to put my pin somewhere, you know, and some of those things also felt like, I think, you know, this a bit of randomness of the allocation during the Berlin conference, right? Where it's like, oh no, I feel like, you know, my cousin, the Queen, has so much. So I also want a bit of something. And, you know, this part of the continent seems like nobody has claimed it. Yeah. So somehow we've all decided amongst ourselves, we're allowed to claim what we want to claim. And we're going to agree amongst ourselves, like there's really nothing going on. So I think this was like, and this randomness about it was really an aspect that I thought came across.
And I also really enjoyed the fact though that a lot of people then, when you would ask though, but didn't you live here for so many years, and didn't you, and then you realize that, you know, it was also this idea that we wanted to have people feel like, but you do belong here. I mean, Germany was not as full as it could have been. And I was thinking, I mean, we're all here. So there's all a reason for us to answer affirmative to, are we local to Berlin, for example? So that was also really nice. And then I think the other thing that we did with respect to the conference was to have an event on the one day. And I think that's where a lot of the discussions then really happened. Like before it was mostly giving people the opportunity to think about things. But on the one day we had an event where we screened a film called Home by Elliot Blue that kind of explores their identity as an Afro-German in Berlin. It also features this trek to Wilhelmstrasse that we'd all also gone through. So that was really interesting. And then we spoke with, we had Dr. Linda Iroko, who is a researcher at the Giga Institute for African Affairs in Berlin and Hamburg, I think they are. Then we had Wadzanae Motsikatai from the Center for Intersectional Justice. And we had Dwayne Jethro, who is he works with European ethnology at the Humboldt University. And we then kind of discussed about them, the significance of the conference in all the work that they do. And I think one of the most interesting and controversial questions was also because we were also talking, one thing that was important to us to bring up was this placard that we mentioned, and how, like, was it just us that we felt that it was, first of all, not enough? Second of all, worrying that it was also just private people just like us who have this connection that put in the work and effort to make it happen, and that it wasn't something that the German government or the local officials felt the need to take responsibility for, to put money into either. And then also, is there enough discourse about this? Because one of the things that really shocked us, I think there's a picture of it as well, was one of the pictures on the placard which shows Africans in chains. If you show it just now, we actually like blocked out their eyes, but on the placard they're not, you can see them. You know, no names, no, like, and it's a very violent picture. picture. And it was interesting because in the discussion we had some people talking about how they think it is necessary to shock the public sometimes, because some of the people who are going to look at this placard they haven't heard about it at all, because it's not part of the school syllabus and stuff. But then I think the final consensus, which also Wadzanai Motikatai had brought in, but also the audience I felt really also expressed this, was that it doesn't change the fact that as a person of African descent yourself, walking in a street with just a really badly situated placard that is really not, you can tell it's not even, it's literally behind a cable box in the street. You can tell not too much thought was put into even giving you the space to be able to step out of just the pedestrian traffic to look at it and think about what it's talking about, and then to just have this picture of Africans in chains, just like that. Yes, it's contextualized, but it's still not. There's a German word I can't think of the English equivalent, Würde. I can even think of the Shona word, but not.
What's the Shona word? Because my German's not that good.
I know we have a lot of Zimbabweans watching.
Yeah, like unu, there's not given
okay.
It's they're not
yeah, no, I don't know the English word. I don't think it exists in English.
It's not, this is not the best translation, but it's not respectful.
Yeah, but like there's a lack of like humanity a bit. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get what we're trying to say. I hope enough listeners have either German or Shona in there. Yeah.
Well, then I think that's such a good point to, I guess, go on. And I think that Meera,
I think
to know, how do we decolonize this thinking
exactly.
of this one plaque that we have? And the work you've done is amazing already from last summer. It looks amazing. Yeah,
exactly. Thank you for sharing so much about the festival. And I think after this, we're going to share with you guys some of the names that Tondi just said, and a little bit more about the festival, and some academics and thinkers and activists to look at. So don't worry if you didn't catch them. And together with that, I'm also going to share an article I read this morning by Simukai Chigudu, who is an professor at Oxford University in African Studies from Zimbabwe, and one of the founding members of Rhodes Must Fall, because he talks about one particular moment in Oxford where they were protesting a debate happening on the pros and cons of colonialism. Was colonialism a force for good or force for bad? But in the Union Bar, where the debate was taking place, there were flyers of Africans in chains that were used to promote a cocktail called Colonial Comeback. And so just when you were talking about that image, yes, this was here in your context, that image was on a plaque for the sake of remembrance, but these images are used so disrespectfully in a lot of places, and that tells us a lot about how these histories are remembered. So how do we decolonize them? Well, I really liked that first image you showed of the artist reimagining the Berlin Conference with African bodies, and that kind of starts thinking creatively about how we can do this. What we like to do in A History of Everyone Else is really think about how histories in different parts of the world are connected. So what was happening in the colonies was directly linked to what was happening in Britain and what was happening in Germany. So a good example of this is, you were talking about how the conference is known as the Congo Conference because of what happened afterwards, and how King Leopold was given the right and legitimized to rule over insane human rights abuses in the Congo. A huge driver of that was the need for rubber, which was needed for the Industrial Revolution in Europe, and tires. Essentially, it coincides with the development of tires and modern transport. And so that it's that kind of what Edward Said called contrapuntal thinking that is another way to help us decolonize these histories. So What I'd like to do next is ask a little bit about what was happening in Zimbabwe at the time, or Rhodesia. We know that there were no representatives sent over to the conference, as if there was absolutely nothing going on there at all, as if there were no leaders, as if there were no communities, as if it was land completely empty. So let's debunk that. What was actually going on in Zimbabwe or Rhodesia at the time?
Okay, so in the 1890s, I mean, also in the context of kind of, I think a lot of the things that I talk about is also kind of started from the fascination with monuments and statues, right? So I'm not going to be able to give like a full thing of everything that was going on, but also around that. So I think at the time when then the British were in Zimbabwe and in the region, they were also like claiming their parts, putting up their statues and all of this. And obviously there was, and they were imposing their taxes and like hut tax and all of this. And they were forcibly displacing people, and obviously there were people resisting this taking of resources, and also taking away of cultures, because there was also like there was a lot of missionary work, and people there was a serious how can you say, like operation to like get rid of certain identities. And there were some people that that fiercely fought against this. And this is one of the people that we'll speak about, Mbuya Nehanda, who for me right now is also a point of interest because there's a statue of her being erected currently. And she, together with other political leaders who also had spiritual, how can I put it? They were also spiritual mediums. So they had political power, but were also seen as a form of, they were guiding people because of their spiritual power, I guess I can put it like this. And during that time, so there was the first Chimurenga, which was the first liberation struggle, which was also the first in the Mashona land of Zimbabwe, but the second, there was also one that was going on in the Matabele land. So that's kind of what inspired the Shona uprisings as well. And at the time, then they managed to fight, but in 1898, there's also the image that we saw that Mbuya Nehanda was captured together with Sekuru Kaguvi, who was also one of the leaders at the time. And this is what was going on. So there was this resistance, and then throughout the times, I mean, then came in guns. So these were also difficult to fight with, because you have just different armor. So Zimbabwe basically stayed under colonial rule under the name Rhodesia, and through also inspiration from these people who'd fought in the first liberation. Drawing from that, people also fought for the War of Independence in the 60s to 1980. And I guess Mbuya Nehanda is a very important character in all of this because she's a source of inspiration. So when she was hanged, like one of the last things she said, well, my bones shall rise again. And also by virtue of being a spirit, it also seems like something eternal and that carries through generations. So this is like one of the people who were fighting at the time.
Thank you. That was a really, you succinctly managed to kind of summarize a huge, vast kind of period.
Yeah, there's a lot. I know I missed a lot, but I guess I'm trying.
But that is, that's kind of what we need. We kind of need that context. So, and it gives a real sense of the scale of this colonization, the length of it. So I guess before the conference, Cecil Rhodes is in this part of Southern Africa. He is finding gold and diamonds and very much kind of extracting this wealth from the region and sending it back home and making a fortune for himself, which probably people are quite aware of because of the success of the Rhodes Must Fall movement. I guess it's important to remember that, like, colonization preceded the Berlin Conference, but then kind of changed also. It evolved after this 1890s conference. So in what ways do you think that it did change? How did colonization change as a result of the conference? I know that, Tondi, you mentioned historians kind of argue about how significant it was and because of how different the results were in different places. But yeah, how did it kind of change things?
Do you want to go? Should I?
Go ahead.
I think from my understanding also had to do with the fact that you now had to have specific agreements with chiefs. And I think that was at a time, but this is also not deep enough to research in this. So if there's anyone in the comment section, could go in with that. But basically that you had to make these agreements, and it was made to seem like, yeah, you know, actually what we're doing is fine, we're civilizing. And this like,
yeah.
I think something interesting, we're always kind of between this colonization, but also resistance towards colonization in this part of the conversation. So I think something that was also quite interesting for us to find out was how many of the so like the Pan-African movement, the fact that this conference took place was also just like the way it became official and everybody was made aware of it, also did push the resistance movement to start to formalize as well. So I think you can almost stretch back the Pan-Africanist movement to some conferences which were held directly in response. I think in 1900, at the occasion of the World Expo in Paris, some Black and Afro-diasporic people from around the world organized a conference to talk about the resistance movement. I mean, in very broad strokes, I'll call it that. And this, it did kind of happen as a result of the conference, as a result of the realization of the need to work for this. And these conferences in the following years then eventually evolved into the Pan-African conferences. So I think the link between the two, the movement and the anti-movement, is extremely strong, and I do think that like that's something that the conference changed.
That's so interesting, and that's very much kind of adds color to what I was reading, which was that one of the longest lasting impacts was that it really legitimized colonization in a way that before was. Rhianna, like the historian in the podcast, how did he describe colonization before?
Yeah, he was just like, it was Europeans nibbling on the biscuit of Africa, as if Africa was just a biscuit to be yeah.
As if it's so harmless.
Yeah.
But so I was gonna say that if we focus a little bit on then Mbuya Nehanda, that tells us a lot about these resistance movements. And for those, maybe we can get up the image of the statue.
Yeah.
And for those who joined our History of Everyone Else on the Maroons of Jamaica, learning about this figure really reminded me a little bit of the nanny of the Maroons, who was, you know, a famous guerrilla anti-colonial fighter who's now one of Jamaica's national heroes, you know, on the $500 note, and songs and memorials built remembering her. And I think what really strikes me about learning about these two figures, Granny of the Maroons and Mbuya Nehanda, is that it reminds us, I think, of two key things. One was that freedom was never granted. Nora, like you said, the Brits love the idea that freedom and liberation was granted to the colonies, but learning about these guerrilla fighters and really centering the resistance movements reminds us that, you know, freedom was never granted, it was always fought for. And within that fight, there was a level of brutality that we're definitely not taught about. And, you know, we only see in these images of you know, enslaved Africans, but we're really not taught to take seriously the brutality that was in those fights. So tell us a bit about Mbuya Nehanda and about the statue that we're looking at.
Okay, so like one thing for me, she's really somebody that, from what I've read about her, is somebody who I look up to, right? And someone who I think it is so important that her history is also remembered. Besides the fact that, like, you know, in a lot of histories, there are not enough women. I think a lot of other things that she presents, for example, that she was a spirit medium, and was really led, I don't know, by what seems, you know, higher values, and that the things that she fought against. And right now, for me, I mean, where actually this idea that where you have this weird association sometimes with Mbuya Nehanda and kind of what's going on at the moment is also like summarized very well by Panashe Chigumadzi. This is her book. And it's called These Bones Will Rise Again. And I think, like, building on like the argument she makes is that you have this person who fought, you know, for people and fought for the liberation of people, and then she's like appropriated by a certain party who then says, yeah, you know, this is she stands for what we stood for, and basically if you don't support us, if you speak against us, you're speaking against her, and you don't want the independence of Zimbabwe, something like this, you know. So they've kind of like taken the whole like independence to be their own, and anybody who's against them is against Zimbabwean independence. And I think this is like the weirdness of the situation. So like right now, like for me, when I see even like reading a lot of articles of the reasons why they've said they're putting up this statue, like this is one of the things where it's like as a tourism hub, but it's like I feel like a lot of the things that she fought for are not being brought to the fore. And it's also like the whole process around it, from what I've understood, is also not very clear. Like, first of all, why are you using the image when she got arrested? You know, when there's so many other people who are probably directly connected to her, either descendants of her or people who are also, you know, either spirit mediums, and also other people who are really continuing the work more clearly that she started to bring these people in. But it seems like there's somehow a disconnection from that. And this is, for example, like the opposition leader who said, like, right now is not the time where you should be doing that. And then he's told, no, you're, this just supports that basically your party is being supported by the West. And it's kind of this constant thing of like taking heroes that I feel like for most Zimbabweans, we understand she's a hero, we respect her, we love her, right? And there's not I think there's not a point where we're like, she shouldn't be celebrated, but it's like the whole process around it, and even like maybe how the statue looks, you know, this is also something that people have been like, besides the point that it's inspired by a certain image, it's like there's so many other ways in how we could have done it. And then even beyond that, thinking about why statues, right? Like we know the statues like that were like when some of the first statues are of David Livingstone, you know, and it like symbolizes also so strongly this idea of conquering. And like at the same time, you're saying the best way to remember someone is through a statue, but like right next door we're saying roads must fall, you know, like statues are not the thing. And it's like you take and exactly the way in which people who oppressed you symbolize themselves, and you say that's how I want to do it, and it smells a bit like Animal Farm, you know. And I think like in a lot of cases it's like it just leaves a weird thing, you know, where it's like you can really make it a more like it's a good opportunity when you say you want to remember someone. You can bring different people in and say, okay, what are we going to do about it? How can we learn more about her? Because even around this, like the statue hasn't been they decided on at beginning of last year that they would put up the statue. It was supposed to be done by August, but by December they were remaking it again, because apparently the president went to inspect it and he said, no, she looks too young. And like to get a direct quote of what the spokesperson from the party said, this is like, this for me was then also so confusing. So he said, okay, the president, this is about the statue being remade. He said the president didn't agree, as it turns out that youthful face of Nehanda should be put away, and we'll have a Nehanda whose closer to the good lady, to how the good lady looked in real life, which means a lot more wrinkled, well past middle age, and of course showing the strains and stresses of captivity. And it's like, what's going on here? I don't know, like I don't know. It's like, first of all, the way and how you choose to do it.
Yeah, and then dates over her youthfulness or her wrinkles on, yeah.
And also the place,
and also just the timing. You know, there's so many things. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, go.
I was just saying there's so many things.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, there's so much going on in Zimbabwe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think that's kind of also where I was going to go, like just with the fact why in this busy junction where it doesn't really make sense from so many points of views with all the things going on, like why now, like what, and then it makes you really question the motives behind it.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that's
on that note, I feel, I mean, we could talk so much more about it, but here is like this kind of paradox in that in Berlin, you guys are looking at this plaque and it's there and it exists and it's already been there, and you're thinking, we need more, we need to do this. But then there's some in Zimbabwe, you're looking at the statue that's been put up by the state, the funds, I believe it's by the state, or the funds have gone in institutionally, and it feels wrong, and it feels like you don't want it there, and it's the process in which it was done was wrong. And I think someone asked a really interesting question in the chat, Andrea Potts, saying, like, more related to the Berlin thing, but like, who should a memorial for the conference be for? Should it be for those from diaspora communities who have a connection to the history, or those who are unfamiliar? How do you make something that's there for both audiences? How should this memorial in Zimbabwe be for, if at all? Basically a future-oriented question of how these things can be done well. As you say, statues may not be the thing, plaques may not be the thing, but then what is the thing to make sure that histories aren't forgotten in this way?
I think it's such a great question, because it is the key question, I think, like, especially if you're looking at, for example, the Berlin context. I think that the moment, like, if for example, one solution, I don't think you can say this is the solution, but one solution would be to say the people right now who are saying like this is not adequate are the African descendants and Afro diaspora people, right? So how can we make a plaque, a memorial that gives them the sense of respect and the sense of inclusion and appreciation that they should have? And I think that the moment you think about making the memorial in this way, it automatically affects the people who don't know much about it, who are going to become aware of it because they see, oh, a lot of effort is being put into this topic. Why is this effort being put into this topic? And it completely changes the discourse around it. And I think it's so key, because I think so many of the problems that are happening because people are saying, but you're not considering these people. And even if you have nothing to do with it, if you see that like the culture in this country is giving weight to these matters, then you're going to become aware of them. So I don't see it as separate at all, but definitely as a really key question to ask. And it's the same with the Mbuya Nehanda statue. If you can go to the root of this question, you're going to find the answers as to why it's being done, and you're going to realize whether or not it's a good idea to do it.
Yeah, thank you. Nora, do you have any final thoughts to add, or like?
I mean, Tondi has already like. I mean, yeah, we have a lot of similar opinions on things, but yeah, I think that as well. And I also think, especially like right now in both instances, right, if you're making a statue now about maybe something about either the event that took place years ago, or somebody who lived a long time ago, maybe also bring in people to try and reimagine, okay, how are we still fighting these things today, you know? So I don't know, for example, with the Berlin conference, it would be, okay, how are you still not maybe including certain voices in certain things? It's like kind of what Tondi says, but, you know, also to try and imagine a way of, okay, how can you capture what happened there and also capture how it's happening today. And I think this then calls in for like talented artists, right, who can make us see things in ways that we ourselves wouldn't imagine them, you know. And I think this is like a key point, like you have something that draws people in, and then I think also to have monuments that show that things are I guess that you bring in different perspectives. So it's not like, okay, you put a statue. I mean, in Mbuya Nehanda's case, like I think for me, it's like it's quite clear that she's on the good side, right? But you know, where maybe you don't impose. You don't have only one person who then imposes their view of what this person stood for. I think you can still bring in other people who can have an input on what this person stood for. And yeah, I guess
I just want to say, like, I definitely think that that's something, like you summarized really well, like the inclusion of different voices and making the forthcoming decisions really intersectional is what is I think that's the way forward. Like,
yeah.
I think that's a lovely note to wrap up on, and just end with a huge thank you to you both for sharing all of this with us today. It's been, my favorite History of Everyone Else chat that we've had. I've learned so much from you both, and we've ended on this very interesting note of what voices are missing, and the power of art to help challenge, you know, not one figure standing for just one thing. So thank you enormously.
So much. And I hope that we can do more recreations and reimaginings. And I just the final thing I want to do is just like re-put up the this, you know, the first thing that you showed us.
Yes.
I love, and I think is a really powerful image to end on.
Yes.
Thank you too so much for the work that you do. Honestly, it's incredible. And also like just the way you guys have organized this today, it was like really interesting. I think you guys really also helped to bring these different ideas that we think about together. So that was like, that was really a great takeaway for me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I feel like everything's been said, so I'm like,
thank you for watching. And like us all, we'll put all of the Instagram handles. Follow us. We do one video a month usually, and these two and the collective are doing incredible work as well. So follow them too.
Follow them.
We hope that there's some more cooperation in the future.
There
great.
will be.
Here's to that. All right.
All right. See
Bye,
you
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.